Now, I'm not going to be able to communicate this as well as I wished I could, but you'll grasp what I'm trying to say. You know, as a pastor, you want to try to lead the people the way that Jesus goes, right? Where Jesus goes, the way Jesus walks. You want to sort of try to lead your little flock that way. And so I was thinking about what a great job that we've done in the last couple of weeks. Because, you know, last week, where were we? You remember? We were in the synagogue. We were in the temple when the lady was bent over double, remember? And then this week, we're at a banquet. And what happened last week? Well, we went from church to a banquet, didn't we? I was feeling pretty good about that. Yeah, I did. That's what I thought it sounded about like that. That's what I was expecting. So it's okay. It was okay. But, you know, last week was such a great event. It was so much fun. And it got me to thinking about dinners and stuff and how we used to eat dinners at home. Now, not as a family altogether. But when I was growing up, more times than not, we sat down as a family. And it made me start wondering I wonder how things are for you. Like I wonder this past week if you were able to sit down with a family member or a friend or maybe as a family for a meal together without, I mean, you know, not like at the table, not like at the TV watching Netflix, you know, that kind of meal. I wondered how many of you like maybe sat down 3 or more times this week with a friend or a family member or maybe as a family and there were no phones present at the table. I wondered. Because see, what I notice is that all those things come into play in some way or another. Now, I bet there's some people here that remember that you used to get together for dinner and you didn't even have dinner until everybody was at the table. Anybody remember those days? Anybody have those days? Yeah? Some of y'all do? Yeah? They used to be that way. And you know, back then, the phone hung on a wall somewhere. And if it rang during dinner, you didn't answer it. Y'all remember that? Yeah, it seems like a memory, like a dream. Yeah. Well, Heather's done real good with us. So sometimes when we go out to eat, like we'll leave here and go eat, she'll just say, leave your phone in the car or leave it in your purse. And you know, it's so much better at lunch when we don't have our phones. It's just amazing. But anyway, a little nostalgia there, I guess, is the thing. But information. Sitting around the table with the family, that's where we did our information sharing with our family. That's where we found out stuff. That's where we found out about our family. And my dad's family got together as a big group several times during the year, which was even better because you learned things about your uncles and aunts, like when they were growing up and stuff like that. But you learned about yourself from those dinners. And it's sort of important, and I think it's something that we've lost over the years. I mean, if you don't talk about it, you don't know, right? And that's sort of how it is. But whatever Jesus was talking about in the scripture that Chris just read a moment ago, it was not about seating arrangements, and it wasn't about etiquette. The banquet table and the seating arrangements are merely just part of the classroom where Jesus is actually teaching us a lesson today. You see, I'm sure that he had observed how people sat around him. And as he got more popular, it was probably more obvious how people were clamoring to get up close to the best seats. And as he watched them, he probably realized that they had forgotten some basic rules of decorum and hospitality. So Jesus simply takes this opportunity to teach what I think is a greater lesson. We find our best selves in humility and sacrificial service. And the truth of that is seen in the way that we act toward how we treat and how we live with one another. And so today we're going to talk about 3 concepts. We're going to talk about the concepts of acceptance, attitude, and action. And it comes from this story that we're talking about today. So the first is the idea of acceptance. And what I want to do is sort of try and tell you a story to help you understand where I'm coming from. Now, many of you have heard me tell stories about someone I respect highly. His name is Tony Campolo. I love him for lots of different reasons, but mainly I love him because he, I believe, is a person who lives out his Christianity in a way that impacts other people. It's not about him. But he has some of the greatest stories ever, and he tells a story because he is a person who takes his faith seriously. He tells a story about a trip that he took. He was headed down to Haiti. Now, you know Haiti. I mean, if it's not an earthquake, it's a hurricane. I mean, there's always time getting hammered down there with something. And he has an organization, a mission organization that sends people down there, and they work down there 365 days a year, 24/7, day in and day out. They work with those people down there. And so because of everything that was happening in that area, he had gone down to check on them personally to see how they were doing. He wanted to see how they were doing emotionally and spiritually. And at the end of a long day, he was tired. And as he says, peopled out. You ever been peopled out? He was peopled out. And so with great relief, he sat down to a meal at a French restaurant there in the heart of Port-au-Prince. And he took a table by the seat so he could watch what was happening on the street, because that's the kind of guy he is. The waiter brought him this delicious-looking meal and set it down in front of him, and he took his knife and fork and was about to dive into it whenever he noticed a motion right over here on this side, and he looked, and there, on that window, right next to his table, was 4 little faces pressed up against that window, looking at his meal. Well, the waiter saw what was happening. He went over quickly and pulled that shade down and said, "I am so sorry. I know that made you uncomfortable. Enjoy your meal." Now, I'm going to tell you, Tony Campolo did not enjoy his meal because he was thinking about those 4 little kids right there. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, he illustrates with that story, Tony Campolo illustrates with that story what Jesus is sending us a challenge about. You see, we need to examine who we pull the shades down on. We need to think about who is it that we do that to. And you know, Jesus knows that most of us do that. He knows how easy it is to pull those shades down so we can shut out the people that we don't want to deal with. So we can pull down the shades on some of the world's problems that we find very heartbreaking and painful. We pull the shades down on those that we don't want to think about. That's what we do. We try to keep at a distance those things that are so overwhelming for us. We open our hearts to all those things, and where would we be? We want to protect ourselves. And so what's wrong with that picture? Well, we've put ourselves in a defensive posture. That's what we've done with that picture. We were trying to prevent something or avoid something. Maybe it's human nature, or maybe we've just been influenced by our culture. Either way, it's not really necessarily the way that we should approach things as a Jesus follower. And let me tell you what I mean. Now, recently, I was in a long line of traffic. It'd been a really long day at the end of a really long week, and I was just wanting to go home. But you know, sometimes you have those long lines of traffic, and you just want to get there. Well, I could see from the side that there was this lady who had evidently been trying to get in for a while. I could tell by watching her actions that she was a little impatient, that she was getting a little frustrated, and she kept trying to inch in, but every time she would, somebody pulled right in front of her, and she could not get out into that traffic. And I thought, well, I'll let her in. And so when I got up there, I just sat back and let her pull right in there. Do you know she didn't even wave thank you or anything? And then yesterday, I was out, and there was this older couple coming down through there, and I held the door open for them. You know, they didn't even recognize me. They didn't even look at me. Now, you know, and you know what's wrong with that? Is that I didn't do it to get recognition or a thank you. I wasn't trying to win an award. I did it because I wanted to. And that's the idea of acceptance that I want you to understand this morning. Acceptance is understanding who we are. And this morning, I want you to understand who you are. As a Jesus follower, what do? We do good things for the sake of doing them, to help people. That's what we do. That's why Tony Campolo is one of my favorite guys. I love to read his stuff. I love to hear all the things that he's doing, because he touches people in ways that we can see, and he also touches them in ways we'll never see. All over the world. Not just in his backyard. He cares truly about those who can't care for themselves. As Jesus followers, we are kind and generous people. We are kind and generous because we want to be that way, not because we want to get a reward, not because we're expecting a thank you, but simply for the peace of being the people that God has called us to be. Being a person of honor, helping others without expecting reward, telling the truth, and thinking of the other person first. That is what acceptance is about. And as a Jesus follower, you need to understand that concept of acceptance. Well, the second concept this morning is attitude. And again, let me tell you a story. Now, you know the name Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A. Maybe you had an opportunity to meet that man. I find him to be a very fascinating person. And when I, at a previous church, found out he was coming to speak to us on a Wednesday night, I was way past excited. In fact, we had been promised as the staff that we would get a chance to spend some one-on-one time with him as a group, one-on-one, but being able to ask questions. And I had some questions. I couldn't wait to get to meet this man. Now, you have to understand, at that time in my life, I was going to get a large sweet tea from Chick-fil-A 4 or 5 times a day. Matter of fact, I went to that same Chick-fil-A so many times, they finally gave me this jug that's about this big and about this big around with Chick-fil-A written on it. And they said, just bring this back and we'll fill that up for you. And so I drank tea all the time. Probably when I got that kidney stone. But, it doesn't matter. I really loved going to Chick-fil-A. And so here I was going to get a chance to meet Truett Cathy face to face. I was so excited. Well, as you might expect, word had gotten out that he was coming. And so a long line of people showed up that night to get into Fellowship Hall, and the doors hadn't even opened yet. They only opened at a certain time. The line was all the way down that hallway, down past the nursery, and out that door on that end of the building. Everybody was coming to hear Truett Cathy. In the meantime, the staff had gathered in the pastor's office for him to come in. And as soon as he came through the door, our eyes met. And I could tell that he saw me, and I could tell he knew I was going to ask him questions. And he handed me about 200 cards, those things that says, you get a free Chick-fil-A sandwich. And said, could you put these on the tables, please? Really? I've got to leave? What? But I did. I went. You see, he gave me the opportunity to view this banquet from a lesser seat. And besides, I had all those tickets. There's only so many seats at those tables. And all the extras, I knew where they were going. But my point is this. We are called to humility. And in humility, there is obedience, and obedience is its own reward. The knowledge that we have fulfilled God's purpose for our lives is the assurance of tranquility of soul and spirit. And the scripture says that the host, Chris read it just a minute ago, the host may come and move us to an exalted place, or he may not. But either way, it's not about a place at the table, is it? No, it's an attitude that's open to be used by God. And I believe that we find our best selves in humility and sacrificial service. And that is why, after all these years, I am still shaped by some very profound examples of humility in my life. The pastor of Green Acres Baptist Church, when I was there those 2 summers, we were running 2,400 plus in Sunday school. We had 3 worship services. But every morning, Dr. Paul Powell, the pastor, was out in the parking lot picking up trash. That is not his job. But if you ask Dr. Paul Powell, that's everybody's job. We need to make this place look good. This is God's place. We need to make it look good. I still remember every Wednesday night, whenever we used to have choir here, I'd see Big Daddy, as Chris calls him. He'd be straightening up all the hymnals in the chairs. He'd be putting pins in every spot, straightening up all the visitor cards every week. That was what Bob was doing. He didn't sing in the choir, but he sure wasn't going to let that time go by without him doing something. That is an example of humility right there. Now, here's the part. We serve humbly because that is the commandment of God, not necessarily the goodness of people. There are simply no perfect people among us to be served. And so whenever you have accepted the part that you have a place and a position and we need you, and your attitude is that I'm going to serve humbly because that's what God wants me to do, it doesn't really matter who's around. You're going to do what you're supposed to do. And that leads us to our third and final concept today, and that's action. Now, after we've learned that we are called to live lives of humility, and that we're supposed to present sacrificial service, who is it that we're supposed to be humble toward, and who are we to serve? Now, I was tempted this morning to ask the children in children's chat that question. And I was certain I would get the same answer as we get on Wednesday night if I asked that prayer meeting group that question. Because I'm certain that all you're sitting there thinking, who's it for? God. So you want to say God, don't you? I know. You want that Sunday school answer. I knew that's what you want to do. See, that's the first thing we think of. And we think it should be God, right? But the answer is not God. Who are we going to be humble to? Henry, what are you going to say, buddy? Neighbors, yes. That's Henry. That is exactly right. It's other people. That's who it's for. It's not God. And some of you may know this name, Dr. Roy McLean. Do you all remember that name? He used to be pastor at First Baptist Church in Atlanta a long time ago. Remember him? Very interesting guy. He has some of the greatest words I think I've ever read. He says that 99% of what we ever do about loving God, we do toward other people. And he said, God does not need your time. God does not need your money or your compassion, but people do. People need your time. People need your money, and they need your compassion. The people around us need us. It is in our connections with and our service to others that we find our identity as Christian people. Now, there's a lot we can learn around the table, but it has little to do with which seat we occupy. It has everything to do with learning about serving, about ministry, about humility, and sacrificial service. And you know how that's accomplished? Through acceptance, through attitude, and through action. And so, as we end this service today, our time of commitment, as Judy plays, is for you to think, what can you do in those areas to make a difference? So as Judy plays, would you prayerfully consider that now? Stand together as she plays, and let's lift this toward God.